Okay, so on this worksheet, you wanted to evaluate functions. And so in number one, you had this function, f of x equal negative 3x plus 4. And you want to find each of these function values. All right, so let's start with part A. So part A says find f of 4. So f of 4 means this. So if you want to find f of 4, so that's part A. So that says that remember f of x means the same thing as y, so you can think of it this way. What's the y value when x is 4? So in place of x, you're going to substitute the value 4. So I get negative 3 times 4 plus 4. And remember the order of operations, so I'm going to multiply first. And so I get negative 12 plus 4. And negative 12 plus 4 is a negative 8. So f of 4 is a negative 8. So negative 8 goes in this blank. All right, part B, you want to find f of negative 2.1. And so again, where we see the variable x in your function, you're going to substitute negative 2.1. So I get negative 3 times negative 2.1 plus 4. And we're going to multiply before we add. And so a negative times a negative is a positive. And so a negative 3 times a negative 2.1 is a positive 6.3. And then 6.3 plus 4, 6 and 3/10 plus 4 is 10 and 3/10. So that's going to be 10.3 here, 10 and 3/10. All right, in letter C, now notice that it does tell you to leave your answer as a fraction. Don't use a decimal, leave it as a fraction. Okay, so you want to find f of negative 2/5. So again, where we see the variable x, you're going to substitute negative 2/5. Because remember, this is f of x, x in this place, x in this particular part of the problem is negative 2/5. So I get negative 3 times a negative 2/5 plus 4. So negative 3 times a negative 2/5 plus 4. And so remember that a negative 3 times a negative 2/5, if I do that right here, a negative 3 times a negative 2/5. So remember, when you multiply fractions, you may want to reduce first and then multiply the numerators and then multiply the denominators. In this particular case, there's nothing that you can reduce. So I'm just going to go ahead and multiply the numerators. And negative 3 times a negative 2 is a positive 6. And then 1 times 5 is 5. So I get 6/5 plus 4. All right, so then you got to remember that when adding fractions, you have to find the LCD, the least common denominator. So I want to write two fractions with the least common denominator of 5, with a denominator of 5. So I'm going to say, so again, I'm writing two fractions with a denominator of 5. So now you're going to write equivalent fractions. So 6/5 is equivalent to what fraction with a denominator of 5? Well, since these denominators are the same, then that means the numerators have to be the same, because 6/5 is equivalent to itself. Now over here, you may want to write this as 4 divided by 1, and then ask yourself, 4 is equivalent to what fraction with a denominator of 5? So if you can't think of what this numerator is based on this information, then just go ahead and use this idea. So remember, you want this denominator to be a 5. So I'm going to multiply this by 5. But what I do to the denominator, I have to do to the numerator. So 4 times 5 is 20. So 20 divided by 5 is 4. So it does make sense that 4 divided by 1 is equivalent to 20 divided by 5. Once you have the common denominator, you add the two fractions together. So 6 plus 20 is 26 fifths. All right, so that's your answer, 26 fifths. Okay, number 2, you have this function now. So number 2, you have g of x is the absolute value of 2x minus 3. And then whatever that is, you're adding 2. So that's your function. And in part A, you want to find g of 0. So again, where we see the variable x, you want to find, you want to substitute 0. So I get the absolute value of 2 times 0 minus 3 plus 2. Now remember, you got to treat the absolute value bars like a grouping symbol. So I'm going to do what's inside this grouping symbol first. So 2 times 0 is 0, and then 0 minus 3 is a negative 3. So I get the absolute value of negative 3, though. And you got to remember that the absolute value of a negative 3 is a positive 3, not a negative 3. And then positive 3 plus 2 is 5. So g of 0 is 5. So I'm going to put 5 right here. All right, part B, you want to find g of 5 this time. So again, where we see the variable x, you're going to substitute 5. So I get g of 5 is going to equal the absolute value of 2 times 5 minus 3 plus 2. So we're going to work within the absolute value bars. Inside the absolute value bars, I'm going to multiply before I subtract. So 2 times 5 is 10. 10 minus 3 is 7. So I get the absolute value of 7 plus 2. And the absolute value of 7 is 7, so 7 plus 2, and that's just 9. So g of 5 is 9. Okay, number 3, this time you have h of x. Number 3, you have h of x is 5x squared minus 3x plus 1. Okay, so now you want to find, part A, you want to find h of 2. So again, where we see the variable x, you're going to substitute 2. So h of 2, h of x, so where we see the variable x, you substitute 2. So I get 5 times 2 squared minus 3 times 2 plus 1. And notice I just went ahead and put those in parentheses. And so remember the order of operations. Don't make the mistake and say 5 times 2 is 10 and then square that because 5 is not being squared. The only thing being squared is 2. And remember in the order of operations, you got to do exponents before you multiply. So 2 times itself is 4. So that's 5 times 4. And then that's just go ahead and let's say that's 6 and then plus 1. And then 5 times 4 is 20. So you get 20 minus 6 plus 1. Now, once in a while, there will be a student that will say negative 6. When they see this right here, they'll say 6 plus 1 is 7. That's not true because that's not a 6. This is a negative 6. So remember the order of operation, you got to add and subtract from left to right. So do it from left to right. 20 minus 6 is 14. 14 plus 1 is 15. So don't make a mistake and say 6 plus 1 is 7, and then say 20 minus 7 is 13, because notice the answer is not 13. Because that's not a 6, that's a negative 6. And a negative 6 plus 1 is not 7. And negative 6 plus 1 is a negative 5. All right, so h of 2 is 15. So 15 goes here. Nothing else goes there. 15 goes there. B, you want to find h of negative 3. All right, so that's a negative 3. So again, where we see the variable x, you can substitute negative 3. Now, it's very important that you see this is being squared, so it's very important you put the negative 3 in parentheses, meaning this. 5 times negative 3 squared minus 3 times negative 3 plus 1. And just like our discussion here, let's go ahead and do this. Now, a mistake people make is they think that negative 3 squared is a negative 9. That's not true, because if you look at this, I have this in parentheses. And so negative 3 times itself, that's right here, means negative 3 times a negative 3, which is a positive 9. That's a positive 9. So that becomes 5 times 9. And then a negative 3 times a negative 3 is plus 9. Let's go ahead and do that now. And then plus 1. And so I get 5 times 9 is 45. 45 plus 9 plus 1. And then 45 plus 9 is 54. And then 54 plus 1 is 55. So h of negative 3 is 55. 55. All right, now over here we have, let me go ahead and see if I can make this a little bit better. All right, so in number 4, we have this function, f of x, and so I'm going to do that here. So we have f of x is 2x minus 3 in parentheses squared minus 1. And so in part A, you have f of 3. So again, where we see the variable x, you can substitute 3. So go ahead and do the work. So it looks like this. It's in parentheses 2 times 3 minus 3 squared minus 1. Now, we have this grouping symbol, so we got to do that first. 2 times 3 is 6. So I have 6 minus 3 squared minus 1. And then 6 minus 3 is 3. So I get 3 squared minus 1. And then 3 squared is 9. 3 times 3 is 9. And 9 minus 1 is 8. So f of 3 is 8. So that goes here. All right, now we want to find, for part B, we want to find f of negative 4. All right, now, so in part B, you have f of negative 4 is equal. All right, so again, wherever you see the variable x, you can substitute negative 4. Now, you got to be careful here. So I'm going to, I don't want to put too many parentheses inside of another. So I'm just going to do this. So I get 2 times a negative 3, just like this. Minus 3, whatever that is, I'm going to square, and then I'm going to subtract 1. All right, so just like we did this, let's work within the grouping symbol. 2 times a negative 3 is a negative 6. So I get negative 6. Subtract 3, whatever that is, I'm going to square, then minus 1. Well, negative 3, subtract 3 means the same thing. Remember, negative 3, subtract 3 means the same thing as negative 6 plus a negative 3, which is a negative 9. That's what that is. And so I get a negative 9 squared minus 1. Now, don't make a mistake and say that's a negative 81, because a negative 9 times itself is a positive 81. And 81 minus 1 is 80. So in part B, I get 80. That goes here. Now in part C, you have this. So again, you want to use the same function. So you want to find f of 0. So if we see the variable x, you can substitute 0. So I get 2 times 0 minus 3 squared minus 1. So 2 times 0 minus 3, that's what this is. That's being squared. This whole thing's being squared. And then I'm going to subtract 1. Okay, and within the grouping symbol, 2 times 0 is 0. So I get 0 minus 3 squared. Subtract 1. 0 subtract 3 is a negative 3. Negative 3. That's being squared. Minus 1. And negative 3 times itself is a positive 9. 9 minus 1 is 8. So, f of 0 is 8. Okay, so that takes care of this worksheet. So make sure you go back and some of these, like these in particular, you got to be careful with quite a few things as you go through the process. So make sure you go back and review all this.